You look out the window and watch the climate change happen. I think what impressed me the most actually was happening here in this town. Usually you would look out and see the big iceberg floating by, and the tip of the iceberg would be visible above the mountains. And someday I looked out and I couldn't see any tip of icebergs. So that was kind of shaking me very, very dramatically, and I was feeling like, you know, watching a mountain, it always stays there. It's, I felt the same way about the icebergs, that there was something happening which I didn't imagine would ever occur.
I think Ilulissat is one of the most dramatic places in Greenland to see climate change, because it has one of the largest glaciers in Ilulissat Ice Fjord, and it has some of the biggest changes. You know, that band of clean exposed bedrock that I was talking about, it's really wide, it's huge in Ilulissat, and you can see the glacier flowing into the sea and just how high the stresses are and the ice dynamics causing all those cracks in the icebergs flowing into the ocean. It's a very dramatic setting. Climate change is not uniform around the world, of course. Generally, there's more warming on land than over water, and generally there's also more warming at higher latitudes than around the equator. So places in the Arctic that have land have much higher warming than the global average. So what we see happening in Greenland is repeated across all the Arctic nations to some degree. But of course, Greenland has the most ice, and it presents the biggest sea level rise threat, which is why it gets the most attention.
But one thing is for certain: Greenland is losing ice. The world's sea levels are rising. If Greenland ice melts away totally, that's 7 meters. 40%, 40% of all people live at the coast, because they live in cities with harbors, where ships are coming in. And if you get 2-3 meter rise, it's going to be so terrible.
From your outstanding research, what are the most insights to tell the world to care about climate crisis?
So I think when you go to the Greenland ice sheet today and you get close to the ice sheet, you'll notice that, you know, the tundra is dark and covered with plants all around the ice sheet, except in this little band where you can see where the ice has retreated since the Little Ice Age, about the year 1900. And there you see that the rock has no vegetation, it's relatively bright, freshly exposed, there's still dust on it from the ice sheet retreating. And that trim line, as we call it, or the bathtub ring, showing how the ice has retreated, you can see that getting bigger every year. And you will go to places where you know that the ice was 100 meters thicker 60 years ago, and you go there today and you see the change with your own eyes. You go to places where you know that they drove through and surveyed stakes 60 years ago, and you go there today and you just see massive crevasse fields that have been exposed as the ice flow is changing. So the changes are quite shocking and striking if you know what to look for.
I think for us, you know, if you go to the ice fjord here in Ilulissat, you will see how quickly the ice is actually moving away from the coastline, and you see that on the vegetation not being there. So it's very, very visible proof that we have here.
So when you stand on the fjord wall and you watch those icebergs slowly going into the ocean, you're watching about 1% of the global sea level rise contribution leaving Greenland and going into the ocean. It's one of the biggest point sources of ice loss from the ice sheet today. Right now, the ice sheet is losing about 10,000 tons of ice per second every minute of every day of every year. That's on average. That's an inconceivably large number. It's so huge. And I think that is what's difficult for people to understand, is just how big the numbers are, how big the forces involved are.
我现在在的位置呢是格陵兰岛的天格路上，那后面呢就是非常有名的一个罗素冰川，整个北极冰融速度越来越快。当地的居民呢告诉我们呢，昨天看到前面黑色的这一块呢是昨天才崩落的哦，也是在24小时之前。冰融下来的水呢非常的湍急哦，我们刚刚看到在下游地方呢已经是一片大河了。气候变迁呢，我相信应该大家会很有感受，整个欧洲的高温热浪袭击非常非常的明显哦。在这个世纪末到下个世纪初，我相信全球各主要城市都有因为气候变迁带来就是城市港口被淹没的可能，我们应该要有所行动了。
You grow up and then you see all of these beautiful, huge icebergs, and then you come back after like 3 years of studying, and then now they're suddenly decreasing. Because it's different when you hear about it in the news. Well, when people say, yeah, climate change is happening and the ice is decreasing, but you can't really like imagine what's happening in the world when you don't see it with your own eyes. So of course it's very sad to see it.
So it's quite different already with the changes, and the weather has shifted. Like when it was supposed to be summer, now it's very cold, and when it's supposed to be winter and we should have a lot of snow, it comes later on. So it's very different from when I was a kid to now.
And rainfall is happening a lot more than it used to. So before, as I said, when I came, just a couple of times a year in the summer. But now we are experiencing on a weekly basis rainfall, and when it rains, it's often a lot. Yeah. So it's a huge difference between when I came just to now in a few years.
As our Prime Minister said, if you look outside, climate change is happening, but if it's not only happening in Greenland, it's happening all over the world. If the glacier melts, New York would probably sink. There's also some Asian towns that are drowning right now. We are melting, we are drowning here in Greenland, though they are burning in the outside world. So it's a bit saddening to see.
Every single year that we're here, the glacier is receding and the glacier is losing vertical height every single year. So we had substantial change that I'm seeing every time I come out. And even when I guide, when we're walking up the slope behind us, there's water coming down in front of us, and that's the glacier constantly losing mass. Yeah. And because we have very warm summers and the winters are not very cold, we're not gaining ice anymore. The ice is not coming forward as much as it used to, so it's not making up the summer loss. So therefore we have each year a net loss of ice that is catching up to us, and eventually this glacier will be gone.
我现在呢是在北极圈里面的开格路上哦，对我刚刚下飞机呢，那我这里用温度计来测量哦，29.6度，天哪，29.6度，你不相信这是在北极圈里面吧？对，这是北极圈，太扯了。
The melting of the glaciers is anticipated to cause a 7-meter sea level rise. I'm sure one can do the math, but this scenario paints a bleak future for a country like the Marshall Islands, and may I add, other low-lying atolls.
We cannot get around that. We can come up with a lot of other factors that might influence it, but our carbon footprint is the key factor in this aspect, because we don't get around the fact that it is our carbon emissions that are the key factor in this.
There is some consensus that a good amount of carbon dioxide to have in the atmosphere would be around 350 parts per million, which would be great. We'd have a stable climate, what we were used to historically. I was born when it was 340 parts per million. Now, some days it gets up to about 410. So we're way past the 350 parts per million threshold.
And we see in the ice cores that climate change can happen like this. So, the problem now is that we see a higher level of methane and carbon dioxide than in the last 1 million years. And we know from physics that if you introduce methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, you increase the greenhouse effect. And that means the Earth will get warmer.
Is that have some obvious evidence about the research to see? Because the reason is from the human activities.
The IPCC assessment reports have done a really good job of partitioning the radiative forcings of each of those elements to show beyond a doubt that it is the increase in carbon that is tipping us towards a warmer planet with warmer atmospheric temperatures, but also, and very especially, warmer ocean temperatures. And we talk a lot about atmospheric temperatures, but really about 90% of this extra energy we're trapping in the planet is now in the oceans. That people don't think about that a lot in day-to-day life, but when you think of the Greenland ice sheet and it has those glaciers that dip their toes in the ocean, as warmer water starts to come into those fjords, Ilulissat Fjord included, as you will see, it really starts to melt and destabilize those glacier toes and cause them to flow out faster. So in Greenland, yes, the atmospheric warming is a huge driver of the increased surface melt, and that's a huge issue. But we also have warming from below in the ocean that's destabilizing the tidewater glaciers. So Greenland reflects both of these processes today.
我现在这里的位置呢，是在格陵兰岛呢 Ilulissat 的北方哈。那这里有一个非常有名的冰川，就是爱奇冰川，是冰川崩解哦，一个非常明显的一个现场哦。附近你看到非常多的一个浮冰哦，都是因为崩塌后以后啊，变成非常多小小的浮冰哦，在这个附近。我们刚刚沿河过来的时候呢，有很大块的又各形各状的不同大小的浮冰。这两天呢，我们在这附近啊，都有听到很多冰裂解的声音。那个裂解的声音，我觉得有点像那个打雷的那个声音哦，就是非常震撼的一些声音哦，叫啪啪啪啪啪，就是你会感觉好像要发生很重大的事情了哦。
This winter, the winter of 2022, was one of the tough winters. But and this winter, for example, we had to take the boats out for 3 months. They were on shore for 3 months. Last year we had the boats in all year, no ice. So that's kind of how, you know, it's difficult to plan ahead because you don't know what kind of winter you're going to get.
Like our forefathers adapted a lot to the weather, like where are they going hunting, where are they catching fish, and when are they going through the year, and when are they catching these animals. But now it's very, even though it's season-based, it's very difficult sometimes to go out and catch. So
the sea is here, it's frozen to ice.
Frozen to ice.
Yeah, then we go out and fishing on the ice.
Yes.
And now we can not go on the ice, we cannot use it anymore.
But I think the climates have been changing a lot. You know about that. Yeah, when I was a kid here, I had snow, so much snow in the city, yeah. And then we had a lot of years without that much snow. But the few 2 years, the last 2 years, we actually have had a lot of snow again.
So in several years, the glacier and the inland ice has been melting a lot, and it has affected the local people as well, because during winter, locals, they do sled dogs, and they go fishing to the inland ice, and then they can also see that the ice, it has been melting, and it has visibly been decreasing.
You can see the affected area here goes down. You can see also see the tops over there, but we have to go over here. You can see the top up there. It goes down also. It used to be flat. It melted, and yeah, and people cannot live here anymore because of it's unstable.
Every time I notice that at 12 o'clock lunchtime, the island is getting hotter and hotter by the day.
It has gotten like hotter, for sure. Ever since when I was little, yeah, I wouldn't think it was that hot, but now it's like, oh my gosh. We don't even want to go outside.
Throughout the seasonal calendar, you'd expect rain on some seasons, but now it seems like it's gone over on its head. We're seeing extensive droughts. Like right now, we're not supposed to be seeing rain as we've seen the past weeks. So climate change has altered very livelihoods.
Growing up in the Marshall Island, I've been observing a lot of problem with sea level rising. Every year you can obviously see that the seas are rising higher and higher, and it's corroding our land.
I get to experience seeing the land, my backyard being eroded firsthand.
The more the sea level rises, the less land we get because it's slowly drifting us away. It's affecting our agriculture. Can't plant anywhere near seawater because the plants are going to die.
And frequent inundation of water and salt getting into our crops, so basically our livelihood is affected from the climate change. The king tide that used to happen at about February once a year, it's happening almost every other month. Inundation of water into the land. Inland water inundating. The water is now next to the people's house.
海水侵蚀已经到，你看哈，到侵蚀到路边来了，一路上都是这样子啊，然后土地的流失哈，那海岸线被侵蚀哦，这非常明显。 这个地方的飞机场，我来看到我吓一跳哦，因为你看这里哦，是不是柏油路的机场啊？刚刚降落的时候呢，其实有些海水都已经打上来了哦，侵蚀它的海岸线呢非常的严重。我们刚刚沿路看到很多的树啊，都已经往海岸边那边倒下去了哦。潮汐的时候呢，这条飞机跑道呢就不见了，就到海底下去了哦，造成他们生活居民上的影响啊非常的大。
Have you find out any way to prevent the erosion of the ocean?
Like we did over there, we bring in sand, rocks, and gravel, and and build seawalls. But we can't afford to build seawalls. Local government budget doesn't have the money. I don't think it will be my generation. Maybe the next generation or so. Whoever is in the government would have to decide which islands to save and which islands to let go. Because you can't afford to build seawalls around all the islands.
As much as possible, we're using, as we can, our Greenlandic products like herbs, and as well as from all the local hunters and local fishermen. So we're purchasing that from local fishermen. Yeah.
Why do you think is it related to climate change?
Well, personally, I haven't really felt any effect. But what I see...
And maybe it's because of climate change, I don't know. But the climate change could also be positive. So we could grow another species of vegetables.
No. But he knows this kind of thing, right?
The habits is not about climate. Forget all about climate, because it's small peaks. We hear that the inland ice is melting. Yeah, that's right. We can feel the warmth, but not such amounts of warmth. It's particles from the.
So climate change is always a bad thing?
No.
No.
In South Greenland it's good because we are growing, agriculture is getting warmer down there, and sheep farmers are using that.
This is good for us. We like that it's getting warmer, and I can see that. I can see why they would want it to be warmer. Some of them said that. Not all of them, but I think there was a few where they said it's actually good that it's getting warmer and that they're welcoming some of the changes. But, you know, what's good for them is devastating for us. What might seem positive, getting warmer, not being as cold, is actually going to impact our entire livelihoods. And so I guess that's something that I hope can be nailed even further.
Before we didn't really, there wasn't a lot of awareness about climate change, and our biggest fear is because these islands are low-lying atolls. We're probably 2 meters above sea level, because we're also seeing that some of the water lenses have become contaminated with salt water, seawater rising, and as a result, it's affecting our local crops, breadfruit, our bananas, the food that we eat locally.
People say for Greenland also have the bad part about climate change and much more maybe the good part, the positive part about to the Greenlandic. So what's your opinion about that?
I know the position, especially further south or the very south of Greenland, that farmers would claim that the crops are growing faster, they get more to feed the animals with grass and stuff like that. But it seems like it's like peeing in your pants, that it warms for a little while and then it gets cold again. It's hard for me to pinpoint any positive sides of climate change, because as I said earlier, it's affecting every way, and in the end it threatens who would we be in the future if not we are able to hunt. That's what we live off. We live off fishing. We live by the ice, with the ice. If it disappears totally, who are we then?
I think most people in Greenland, most Greenlanders, they prefer the climate as it was. The history of the country is very cold, and the history of the indigenous people here are hunting for seals, hunting for even for polar bear, walrus, whales, and I think most people would like to continue that lifestyle. They view it as their culture and something they value it. They find very valuable.
Do most people know about climate change?
Some of them are really unsure whether we're going to lose the country. Some of them believe that God had created this country, this island, and made the people live on it. There's no way God can take it away from them. That's what some people think. But most of them are aware of climate change.
We buried our loved ones in a land where we believe they'll be rest forever and not to be worried about them anymore. The water come and take them away. So that's affecting us psychologically as well.
God told us that He would protect us, that He would send that one flood and that there wouldn't be another crisis. And if it's in God's hands, that can be your belief, and that makes sense, and we're not disputing any of that. But it's better to be prepared just in case. You know, God helps those who help themselves. God entrusted us to take care of this planet and this earth. And so that's a lot of what we've been offering as, you know, an alternative for how and why the Marshall Islands should adapt, how and why we should be invested in the climate crisis and responding to it.
Good horsetail could be problematic because it has quite long roots. So if they sort of grow down into the archaeological layers, they start to destroy the artifacts, but also just like move the soil around, so we don't have a structural layer anymore. So that could also be a problem for archaeological sites, that we get more.
And that means that all of the human waste, the human activity, the animal bones, the skin, everything that used to be preserved in the cold is now slowly disintegrating in the heat.
You can end up having like really beautiful plants, but no archaeology left.
Because with a glacier you can see it with your own eyes, it's melting. But here we have things that are hidden beneath the ground. So and that's also our fear, that if you have a site and you come back in 20 years, it's just completely gone.
I don't think it would be a problem for us to live here, and also when the ice is disappeared, because we live high. The sea level will get higher, but it will even reach the houses. We don't have houses near to the sea like you have in Europe, and the countries are very lower, and I think they are the first countries who have to face it hard when it comes to there.
should open eyes of everybody, because this is a global issue. We're going to get more iceberg coming to the Atlantic. Huh?
Yeah. What's happening in Greenland affects here, in my own island, in my own country. What's happening in some part of the world affects everyone else. It's not just your neighborhood, but it will affect everybody else.
We are, for sure, people of the ocean. We have no control over that fact, but now with climate change, it can be one of the things that could potentially destroy everything that's about the Marshall Islands.
So it just gives me a sense of, you know, what is the RMI going to do next, and you know, all that ton of water that's going into the ocean, it's coming to us next. So what are we going to do?
If there is something wrong, we have to move, leave our island. But you know, this is our homeland and we really love it. We can do nothing. We don't have food to go with. Only few airlines, but small one. It's about 13 passengers. Cannot accommodate all the people here. Take them over when there is something wrong.
The ice are melting and the sea is rising. Here in the Marshall Islands, we are already experiencing the effect of climate change. And we are on the front lines of this global crisis.
But Marshall Islands are very life woven into the land. There's a saying in Marshallese that a man without a land is no man. And for anybody just to come and say, why don't you just move to another high mountain land? They have no understanding of who we are as Marshallese. It's not that simple as just leave your land.
Amalu alisarneq imatu annertinerusum eqqornarluneq angila iluaqqussiuq ilatingullu malunangiusuttumi imma kinguariartoqarsinnerusumi finassingingittum.
In Greenland, we can see it spreading in just the last 5 or 10 years. It's becoming more and more common. They suddenly spread very fast. You even see them quite a lot in the city here. And they spread in nature quite fast, and they can outcompete local species. So that is always a danger, that you get these invasive species.
Fishing is going very well with the increasement of water temperature, at least for this part of Greenland, yes. For this region, it has meant that the shrimp population out here seems to be increasing. But at some point, when the water becomes too warm out here, the shrimp population will then migrate further north.
If you suddenly lose those fatty Arctic species, that means that species like the humpback whale have to eat a lot more of other organisms that is not as fatty to get the same amount of energy. We are not seeing that, it's not happening yet, but it's just, these are potential things that could happen in the future, that we see a shift because these Arctic species are moving further away.
We're noticing a huge amount of significant decline in the fish. When I was young, we could just go out for an hour or two and we'd catch a lot of fish. Nowadays, you gotta go out real far and you'd be lucky if you catch something within an hour or two. Otherwise, you'll be out there all day long and almost come home with no fish.
But nowadays, either you're really good, or otherwise you're not getting any, like in the past.
Most of the times, the fish you catch will be undersized and will not have, are still in their juvenile phases. This is something that we face given the notion of shifting the baselines.
99% of the Marshall Islands is water. And if the water warms, then sea level will rise. But if it warms up, the fish may not be able to be there. You can't fish. If you can't fish, you can't survive. You might as well have to migrate somewhere else.
It's pretty interesting how two places very far from each other, Marshall Islands and Greenland. One is very cold, one is pretty humid, and one is very large and one is very small. They're going through the same problems with climate change, and they're both experiencing pretty much the same things.
Somewhere it's getting even colder, somewhere else it's getting warmer. The rain is falling more heavily, the storms are stronger, and you know, everything is changing. So it's a global phenomena, but those who are impacted the most is those people living in the Arctic area. And I read somewhere recently that the number of sledge dogs, for instance, have been diminishing. Like half of the sled dogs the owners had to kill them because they couldn't afford to feed them because they cannot go on the sea ice anymore.
昨天晚上到现在雨是真的下得蛮大的哦。我们访问了德国前总理库里克他告诉我们说，格陵兰呢有这么大的雨势其实是很少见的哦。工作犬呢，最近的数量也大量的减少，为什么呢？因为他们已经不需要它了哦，就是地面上呢，就是有雪或有冰的时间呢是越来越少了，这在冬天的时间那会比较厚，其他的话其实已经都用不到工作犬来拖东西了，所以这个区域的工作犬原本呢听说有8000多只那现在呢几乎只剩下3000只左右，那5000只哪里去呢？5000只都安乐死了。那我有问他们说，为什么就是要安乐死呢？那当地的就是居民告诉我们说，因为数量蛮大的，然后呢他们未来的生活也没有人可以好好照顾他们所以就给他们安乐死。我想气候变迁呢给我们带来很大的生活上的冲击，也许下一个气候难民就是我们。
We have about 100 projects per year or something like that coming in, and we have about 250, 300 scientists. I started up this project up in northeast Greenland, I think almost 30 years ago, and it's still running, and we are still doing very much the same, where they have been lying there hard working for maybe 12 hours per day out in the field. Then they come back with what you could call a small piece of equation for climate models. So it's a very slow process, and we do it because our perception is so much control, and we do not dare to take decisions before we are convinced that we are taking the right decision, and that's why we are modeling and modeling and modeling on and on. If you look
remember last year in the August 14th, you know, they have the post and in New York Times about the ramming in the ice sheet. Yeah, it's the, you know, in every record it doesn't seems like rain on the ice sheet.
That was a very extreme event. We're not used to getting rain on the ice sheet. Everybody was starting to guess that we would start to get rain on the ice sheet because of climate change and the atmosphere warming and holding more water. So at the Geological Survey of Denmark and Greenland here, we had started to put rain gauges on our weather stations on the ice sheet. Normally they don't have them because there's no rain. But then that event happened and it was very unexpected, and we didn't have any rain gauges, for example, at Summit yet, because nobody expected there to actually be rain at Summit anytime soon. We thought we probably had many years to roll out the rain gauges. So that one caught us very unaware.
Trouble is, the complex system of weather and oceans and mountains and people and everything is so complex, it's very hard to say precisely how this is going to happen. And that is why everybody in the world is using climate models, computer models to do. But we can prove from the ice cores that the computer models we use are wrong. Yeah, in certain degrees they are wrong. They are the best we can do, but we can also demonstrate it's not enough. We are still stupid. We are still, there's many things we do not know. And the problem with the computer model is it also contains what we don't know, but in a bad way, because that means maybe the result is not completely right.
The ice sheet likes it to be cold and frozen all the time. And liquid water is just very corrosive to the ice sheet because it contains a lot of energy. So when there's more liquid water, through melt or through rain, it starts to flow into the ice and it heats up the ice. And that can make the ice flow faster, much faster in fact. The viscosity of ice is very dependent on temperature. If ice warms by 10 degrees Celsius, it can flow 10 times faster for the same driving stress. It's a huge response. So that is the huge concern about rain and melt. If we have more rain, more melt, it can make the ice flow faster into the ocean. And we're not entirely sure how much faster or what the total implication is going to be. And that's always been one of the sources of uncertainty in Greenland sea level predictions, is how sensitive are the ice dynamics to this increasing water input. Generally, our models and our climate models are best at reproducing the average, and extreme events can be challenging because some of these events that bring rain to Greenland, for example, they're over a very limited space and a very limited time. So you need really high resolution of your models in time and space to capture these processes. You know, we talk about things like atmospheric rivers, which is just a bunch of warm water coming from low latitudes up to high latitudes and bringing moisture and heat onto the ice sheet and causing these extreme events. But something like an atmospheric river is a very small scale process at the scale of the whole planet. And these processes are hard to resolve in a climate model.
It's important that we don't get distracted by single years or small events. Like one year we might have a very cold year with a lot of sea ice, and then it's easy to say that global climate warming is not happening. That keep in mind the facts, because what we are seeing now is a lot of variability. It doesn't mean that climate change is not happening. It doesn't mean that climate change isn't happening faster than it did 10 years ago.
Those of us who study climate change, we think we have a pretty good idea of how it's happening and how it's happening faster than politicians are reacting. But an event like that comes and it's happening even faster than I think it should be happening, which makes me a little cautious about where we're going in the future. It's happening faster than we forecast at the moment.
So I would say to all the people who are climate skepticists that if they believe in physics and mathematics, if they believe in 2 and 2 make 4, and if they believe that certain gases like methane and CO2 actually enhance the greenhouse effect, and the Earth will be warmer, that's enough for them to worry.
I think climate researchers in particular are starting to talk about a little bit more about climate anxiety or climate grief. Yes. When you think about the future, yes. Just this gloom. It's not joyous work to project the demise of the Greenland ice sheet and wondering about what that's going to mean for the world and wondering why nobody seems to care and you scream alone into your pillow or Twitter account and no one cares. Yeah. So I think there is a huge sense of helplessness. And I think those of us who have kids are especially sensitive to the direction the world is heading, especially with climate change. But at the same time, I have to be a little optimistic that at some point we will take action. We've waited too long. The next best time to take action is tomorrow. We'll probably wait longer than that. But at some point, it's going to get so bad with the sea level inundation, with the wildfires, with the crop failures, that people will have to notice and take action. And I'm sure that turning point is coming, and I hope it's sooner rather than later. Because yes, I mean, 2100 sounds far away, but of course, a child born in Denmark today or Taiwan has a demographic expectation of living beyond 2100. So in some ways, the 2100 cohort has already started to populate the Earth. So it doesn't seem that far away in human timescales.
How I feel about this is the clock has started, and the clock now is going much faster. We're constantly speeding it up. So what we're asking our kids to do is we want them to stop the clock. We have to stop it now, because by the time it gets to them, the clock will be way too fast. They won't have the time left to make a difference. We have the time now to make a difference, they won't. So I hope we actually do something so our future generations can walk on this beautiful glacier again.
Less sea ice, more sea ice, warmer, colder, all these extremes. And we have to deal with this. And it's not, I'm not an alarmist generally that say that we have to panic, because generally panicking about things isn't constructive. We need to find constructive long-term solutions to this.
The world will not end. If we get climate change, it will be a new situation. But we will not all die, and the Earth will not end. It will just be another one. And it's very important that the young people do not panic and say, oh, now everything stops. No, we have to take the challenge to think, to adapt, and to cut back on emissions in a sensible way. But take it easy. Don't panic.
And the last 3 IPCC reports have been pretty conclusive in saying it's CO2, we need to lower CO2, it's CO2, we need to lower CO2, it's CO2, we need to lower CO2. I don't think writing more scientific papers is the best way to address this problem. You could hire 1,000 glaciologists and the ice sheet will still melt at the same rate. All we can do is diagnose the scale of the problem. So I think the most important task facing us right now on the climate action is educating people. And educating the people in charge, or educating the people who aren't in charge to tell the people who are in charge what to do. Trying to wrap that up for people in a way that they can digest in between the other things they have going on in their lives. I mean, looking after the kids, looking after the parents, doing their job at work, maybe having a hobby, seeing their friends, and then caring for climate 1%, 2%, maybe 5% of their time.
My message is very simple. Please, please, please stop burning fossil fuels and go on renewables. Wind, solar, hydropower, whatever. That would be so lovely.
We can always do something individually. We don't have to wait for others to do so or tell us to do. And I think it's very important that we all think that we can start today. We don't have to wait.
So I think focus should be replacing fossil fuel on very large volume consumers like power plants or production facilities in general.
Our neighbors are burning, we are drowning. So please be more thoughtful of your fossil fuel consumption and commute to work by public transport at least once a week. That would be nice.
I want to reach out to people to educate them on climate change and to make them understand what is happening. When people do their work, they need to explain more thoroughly to people from the outer islands. Because most people in the outer islands, they don't speak English.
Some of what we've also been doing is explaining what fossil fuels are. Translating that into Marshallese is extremely difficult. What are fossil fuels? What are carbon emissions? We're having to create new language to describe the climate crisis. And, a lot of times when we bring up the concept of climate change, they understand what it is. They know what climate change is, but they don't necessarily understand what causes it. And so there's a lot of misinformation about who causes climate change, because then what we get a lot of pushback on is, well, if you're out there telling all these other countries to lower their emissions, what about us? Look at all these cars we're driving. Look at all these boats we have. But what they don't understand is the Marshall Islands' contribution to global emissions is just 0.0007% of the world's global emissions. That means that's how much the Marshall Islands contributes to all of the emissions in the world. And so even if we became the most renewable energy island on the planet, the island would still go underwater. And so some of the education we've had to do is to teach people that actually international organizing and international advocacy is necessary for the climate crisis, for the Marshallese people. We have to keep telling the world our story, and we have to keep telling what's at stake.
I would love to say that we would love to see more education about the climate changes and more connection between the different countries, generally in all of the countries, about the climate change that is happening now. Because after all, climate change is under children's rights. Every child has the right to live in good conditions.
I have and quite big workshops where I have had all from local hunters to and also representatives from the scientific community, and then all the relevant stakeholders, both national and international stakeholders, in relation to these issues, simply to discuss what are the important issues and how can we solve them together. I don't want to stimulate the ideas. I want to facilitate the process of getting the ideas, and I think that's one of the things that I can actually, that I can make people with very different backgrounds cooperate, and that's maybe my best quality.
It's useful to think of 3 possible futures: the low emissions future or Paris Agreement, a middle of the road, and then a high emissions. And right now we're on the high emissions trajectory, which some people call Mad Max world. It is low technology, low cooperation. It's not a good place. It ends up in resource scarcity and a very poor climate, like the movie Mad Max. At the very far other end is the low emissions pathway, which would be Paris Agreement. And some people call that Star Trek world, where it's like high technology and high cooperation. And then somewhere in the middle is maybe this third road, which is something like what Denmark has today, a sort of ecotopia, where we have medium technology, medium cooperation, but we all have relatively smaller carbon footprints. And trying to explain that range of possibilities to the average person and why we should be so afraid to avoid the high emissions scenario, that's a huge challenge because it's not a very positive message.
解冻格陵兰采访记录团队亲自造访11个城镇，与专家学者、政府官员、当地居民深度访谈。气候变迁已经是不争的事实，因应调适跟积极的付诸行动，才是我们每一位都必须面对的课题。然而，格陵兰的冰融也带来了丰沛的水利资源，使得这里的再生能源使用率超过了60%。孩子们能在夏季的溪边开心玩水，变暖的洋流带来了丰富的渔业资源。从冰层中裸露的土地，有着更多的可供畜牧、耕种的农业发展机会。我大胆地预言，渐渐地，在北极的格陵兰将成为宜居的城市。
Save our homes. We need more education, knowledge, understanding, and more help on climate change.
Climate change is affecting all of us in the Pacific. We are all small islands, developing states, and we're looking up to the major emitters to stop talking and start committing to their commitments, because the ice are melting and the sea is rising, and we're tired of having them talk, but we need action.
However, as long as there remains a breath in my being, we'll continue to voice our solitary concerns to the big carbon emitters that they need to phase out the use of fossil fuel. As you can see, climate change is a phenomenon that cannot be dealt with in silo. It needs the global community cooperation and unification.
I've been to Ilulissat, I camped on a glacier, and so I've experienced and seen the melting ice and also seen even the calving, the ice crashing into the ocean. And I think what I experienced watching the film is very similar to what I experienced being there, which is just how incredibly interconnected the world is, how incredibly small it is, and how something that can be happening there is impacting us here. And I think that's what's really good about the film, is that it brings us to that site and that location, and it brings it down to our level. And I'm hoping that with the addition of the Marshall Islands story to that film, that it creates an even bigger connection.
So this is what I feel. As an individual, as a Marshallese, as a son, as a father and a grandfather, and as a leader in the country. What I want for me and myself, and not thinking about rest of the family members of the global village. So if we are truly a global village, family, we should take care of each other, shouldn't we?
We have a lot of difficulty getting attention on climate change because there's so many other things happening in the media landscape, rightfully so. When the last AR6 assessment had its final release, it was 10 days before Will Smith slapped Chris Rock. And so, you know, you have this process. It takes many years, thousands of scientists, to try to produce a state-of-the-art assessment on global climate. This is the climate roar. This is the event. Everybody should focus on this. And then like 10 days later, Will Smith slaps Chris Rock and the whole media moves onwards. And so that is the sort of thing that we need to think about, how to stay socially relevant as climate scientists. We need to understand that we also have an obligation to put our knowledge and our insights out into formats that are accessible for the general public and not just feeding up into assessment reports for IPCC. And, you know, engaging more with like what you're doing, which is a documentary to communicate climate change and climate change implications to a wider cross-section, that will probably be more impactful at the end of the day than me producing another 20-page PDF that goes on the website somewhere.
The best advice I feel I can give to this documentary is to support civil society to become more active in promoting solutions to climate change. And I think there are two key roles that civil society can play. One is as voters, and put pressure on politicians and governments to be more aware of the impacts of climate change, and that we need to find solutions very soon to climate change. The second is becoming active consumers and put pressure on business to deliver more green products in line with the net zero targets, and also, of course, products that are green, more green in totality. And I think that the more you can link what you're doing on spot, on site, different places in the world, to the global movements for civil society, the more impact the documentary will have.
Melting Greenland is a call to action, not just for the next generation, but for all of us, now. The effects of climate change are being felt in all corners of the globe every day. Everybody has their part to play in limiting these effects: governments, businesses, and consumers. Businesses need to place sustainability at the heart of their operations. And they need to work with governments to help implement the solutions and stress the urgency of the positive policy changes that are needed. There are some great news stories. For example, wind and solar are now the cheapest form of electricity in many countries around the world, and an increasing number of businesses, for example, the ones that we work with, the RE100, are transitioning to 100% renewable electricity because it makes business sense. But we need to go further and faster, much faster. It's time for everybody to step up and take action.